Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Clinics Review Articles podcast series. I'm Taylor Hayes, the managing editor for Primary Care Clinics and Office Practice here at Elsevier. Primary Care Clinics and Office Practice is a quarterly publication consisting of review articles focused on a central topic for primary care physicians. Today, we will be discussing the recent December 2025 issue dedicated to AI in primary care, guest edited by Dr. Vincent Morelli from the Department of Family and Community Medicine at Meharry Medical College, and consulting editor Joel Heideball from the Departments of Family Medicine and Urology at the University of Michigan Medical School. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today. I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Heideball for the first question.
Thank you, Taylor, and welcome to Dr. Morelli. Vince has been a longtime colleague and contributor to Primary Care Clinics, and we're honored to have him as part of this podcast today and part of this discussion. So welcome, Vince.
Thank you very much, Joel. Very good to be here with yourself and Elsevier.
So, Vince, walk us through just a little bit of sort of what brought you to want to create this really great and informative and certainly timely volume of manuscripts for primary care clinics on artificial intelligence. Tell us about kind of what you were thinking and what you wanted to get out for dissemination, but also kind of how we're going to define this.
I guess there was so much talk about artificial intelligence right as it first came out, and the large language models that first came out, that I knew it was going to be an impact on medicine. And I had friends here in the sciences and computer sciences that were all, they were talking about it constantly. And I just felt a need for us to come out and express this pretty complicated subject so that primary care docs could see how they're going to use it, could make practical applications in the clinic and that kind of thing. So I just thought that the timing was good, and the need for simplification and education amongst primary care docs, the timing was important.
Starting us off with the volume, you wrote some great manuscripts on foundations of AI in medicine and primary care, and then also AI as it relates to primary care and administrative medicine. How do we define AI relative to you and I in our primary care practices? We're going to talk more about how it can help us and some potential pitfalls, but starting with the basic sort of definitions, how should we think about this?
So AI is kind of an umbrella term. There's a million definitions, but to simplify it, it really means computers that mimic human learning in some fashion. So that can be done with a set of rules, which would be the old, early AI models, that they just follow a set of rules that are pre-programmed. It can be what's called machine learning, which is where machines learn on their own. Or it can be, if you want to take it one step deeper, there are the various ways that machines will learn on their own. The most common now being deep learning, or learning that imitates how the brain works. We're talking about artificial intelligence here in this issue. We're talking about deep learning that occurs in a way that mimics the human brain as these computers go on to learn from their experiences.
Wow, thank you. That's a great way to summarize it. I know the term can be very daunting. I know the term can be very intimidating. I know the term can be very sort of large and all-encompassing. I was impressed, especially in reading your manuscript on foundations of AI, talking about medicine and primary care. You certainly covered a lot of the great terms, but also provided a lot of insight into things like retrieval augmented generation systems and the impacts of energy cost. How does that relate to us in primary care?
Let's take the first part of your question, the foundations and machines that use RAG, augmented generation. So the foundations, I thought it was important for us to know in primary care, because if we don't know exactly how it works, we won't know its limitations and when we should question it. staying with the foundations, it's important to know that these large language models, which are really what we're talking about currently, rather than these AI models that just look at pictures or just look at videos. So for a large language model would look at words, all the medical words or all the legal words, artificial intelligence like DALL-E that take a look at pictures and make images from those. And video would be something like your self-driving cars, etc. When we know that there's a large body of information that needs to be used in order to train these models, it's important to realize that these models don't learn on the fly. They can't learn from what we're telling them right now. They need to take these models offline and retrain them with new information as it comes in, or it will become outdated. So this retrieval augmented generation just means that we have a body of knowledge that has trained our large language models. That body is there. And now, since we can't take the whole body offline and retrain it all the time, we're just going to take the top 10 web pages, the RAG, the retrieval augmented generated topics, and we're going to filter that in with our AI models, since these models can't learn on the fly. So that is essentially one reason why we have to know the limitations, because we know that if they don't take these models offline and retrain them periodically, we're going to get outdated, old, and biased information. So that's one aspect. The second part of your question, the energy use, it's really surprising the amount of energy that these models use. In the chapter on foundations, I wrote that early AI models used about the amount of energy required to provide 11,000 households for a year, energy for a year, which is an amazing amount. Now, they don't release those figures anymore, but if you extrapolate out from what we do from our first model out to where we are today, ChatGPT 4.5 and 5 and 5.2, et cetera, if you extrapolate out, it would take the amount of energy to provide 39 million homes for a year, which is just an astounding amount of energy. And that's why all these energy companies are ramping up and nuclear energy is making a comeback. And Bill Gates is, financing nuclear fusion reactions and so forth. But it's important to keep in mind the energy cost that each time we use it. In fact, one of the models, I think it was either GPT or Gemini, recommended that you don't say thank you to these models after you get an answer, because every time you say thank you, it had to come back and say, oh, it's great, and do you want to know anything else? And that costs energy. So but it's a significant amount of energy. So those are two of the things that we need to keep in mind when we're using these. Most importantly, from our medical standpoint, is the likelihood of errors that's caused by outdated or degrading models. All of these models, 90% of them, will degrade over time, either from biases that have been inadvertently programmed in or left out, or just from being outdated. So it's important to keep that all in mind. And when you really think about it and look at the data, about 50% of responses on AI models is incorrect in some fashion. If you ever use one called Perplexity, it helps you give some references, but when you look at the references often have nothing to do with what you're talking about. So it's really important that we keep that in mind, that they're oftentimes inaccurate. So anyway, that's the foundational part that I thought was important to emphasize in the chapter.
Thank you. I think those two manuscripts to start the volume are really important to not only set the stage, but give that foundational information of AI that I think a lot of people don't know and a lot of people probably don't think about. We tend to focus a lot on applicability. And as I was preparing for this today, I actually just jotted down, very stream of consciousness, some impressions of AI that I'd come across in my own practice, in my own medical career over the past week. And I wanted to get your impression on these relative to benefit, relative to risk, relative to bias. And I think we have a lot of opportunity on how AI could help us and make us more efficient. I think a lot of people, easily multiple colleagues, I think most people would attest to this, have thought, well, with AI, I probably got about a 5-year or less shelf life, and then I'll be out of a job. You won't need me, or, whatever brand of medicine you're in. Will AI or a computer replace our ability to think? There's some studies that have come out that have found that AI is more accurate in some of the urgent care and ER medicine settings already in terms of yielding a diagnosis. But also with the opportunity to make us more efficient in the office, dictation, charting, information gathering, information synthesis. Not that it's not fraught with error or mistake, and we still have to check that. Living in the editing and publication world, it could make it a lot easier, but it could also make it incorrect. I'm on the editorial board of Primer through STFM, Society of Teachers of Family Medicine, and our group just published an emerging issue in Journal Publishing, The Use of Artificial Intelligence to Generate Letters to the Editor, where we've all heard about how AI can write our kids' college essays for us, or we can use it to write letters of reference or what have you. But with all of these possibilities, what are some fears and challenges that you think of or come to mind right away for you relative to AI in our workflow?
It's going to benefit the back end, the administrative tasks, the billing, the appointment making, certainly it's being used right now in clinic to write our notes for us, which is a fantastic time saver. So certainly there are great things that are already happening with AI. And the biggest fears from the public standpoint is this black box phenomenon. We don't know what's going on inside AI, so we can't trust it. That's kind of true. It's also moving us towards an AI called XAI, which is exposed AI or exposure AI. And that's why there's a trend towards that, because we're a little afraid of what we don't know, which is certainly reasonable if we can't check it. It's that really like, if it was, to use a metaphor, it would be like someone comes into a fast food place and orders a hamburger that's medium rare with extra tomatoes. So if you're watching the cook, you can see that he's cooking, but you don't know that he's not pressing down on the burger with his spatula. So you don't really know what calculations are going on to make that burger medium rare. The same with the tomato guy that's putting the tomatoes on. You don't know that he came up with a efficient way to put the tomatoes on the burger while you weren't looking. But anyway, for some reason, we're afraid, and we become afraid because we don't know what's going on inside those calculating nodes inside the neural networks. And there are other challenges. As I mentioned before, the training data has got to be true training data. It's got to be good information you're programming it with. You don't want to use an AI model that's been trained on the Bible if you are asking it scientific questions and those kind of things, or if you don't want to use one that's been trained in legalese if you want to know medical knowledge and that kind of thing. And again, the big problems that we have with our the errors and the degradation and so forth that occurs over time.
I agree with everything, and it makes us think a lot about how we develop these systems going forward. On a clinical application, there's likely some opportunity for evolution in triage, and there's likely some opportunity for evolution in diagnosis or care coordination. Of course, medicine doesn't fit in a box. Of course, not every patient falls into an algorithm. Of course, every patient scenario doesn't fall into an evidence-based guideline, of course. But in a lot of situations, a lot of these paradigms are being developed to follow evidence-based algorithms that are already in existence. So for example, and I hate to make this analogy, but I'm going to make it only because when they redraw Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all know where healthcare, well-being, and self-preservation is. I don't know where cable TV falls on there. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But when my cable goes out, I can't call anyone. I got to go through the website and I got to go through a chat, something or other, to help diagnose the problem. Now, sometimes they're right. Now, sometimes they're wrong. And sometimes, probably like medicine, my cable just magically comes back on and it gets better on its own anyway, right? But there are some rudimentary ways to incorporate symptomatology into evidence-based paradigms that AI could potentially generate. And I know there are groups working on this. What are your thoughts on this for triage?
I would be a little hesitant at this point as far as triage goes, because that's really making a decision who's acutely ill, who can wait a little while, who needs to be seen next week, that kind of thing. I'm not confident that AI would be able to do that yet. I mean, it's certainly possible in the future as we, improve and get better and so forth. That would be something that we would look for. But I'll tell you what, we better not make a mistake in that area. It's like a self-driving car getting in an accident. There's not a whole lot of room for error. So triage is one thing that I think we're a little away from. We want at least human oversight of that. Diagnosis, I'm a little more optimistic about. And the reason is, I think we're entering a new age of collaborative medicine. It's not going to be us having all the information, doctors having all the information and passing it on to patients who don't know anything. It's going to be the patients knowing a lot more about their specific information than we do because they just looked it up and have tons of interest in whatever their malady is. But they're not going to have confidence in what they've come up with. So they're going to need our collaboration in order to confidently have a diagnosis and confidently accept a treatment. I think the generation of a differential diagnosis is great because if there's 10 things, we might be able to think of 9 of them off our top of our heads, but we might forget the 10th one, and it might be something worth considering. So I think there's a lot of possibilities as we move forward in both triage and diagnosis.
Yeah, thank you for also highlighting the patient aspect of this. And I agree with you, and I actually enjoy this. I think many patients go to the doctor and will say something to the effect of, okay, you're not going to like this. I looked this up on the internet, but I have a question about such and such. I actually welcome it, and I think you're absolutely right. Patients are getting smarter because they have so much at their fingertips that they have access to. In a lot of ways, they have a lot of the same stuff that you and I do. And they're going to ask better questions, and they're going to ask questions with better resources and better references. In your volume, Dr. Conley's chapter and manuscript on artificial intelligence and patient management really hinted at the opportunity to make this patient-driven, but also personalized. And I liked a lot of that because and I'm just before this podcast today, I have a physician appointment later this week, and I had to go through a portal to answer a lot of questions, but it generated a lot of information for the physician who's going to see me through an AI derivative. And I thought that was really great because it did personalize it relative to me and what I need to go to the physician for later this week. Right now, what do you see as AI's principal use in primary care? How can we best utilize AI based on where we are today?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning Dr. Conley's 2 chapters, which he did a fantastic job on AI and clinical diagnosis and decision-making and patient management and so forth. And that leads me to say the greatest help, first of all, is going to be administrative, which we've talked about. I think that's going to be just fantastic time saver. And then the second greatest help, I think, in terms of patients is it's going to allow more educated decisions and educated discussions. And when patients are brought into the decision-making process, they're going to be more likely to follow their own treatments, our own treatments, the treatments that we agree are important for whatever they have. And that compliance is going to make a fantastic impact, I think, on primary care. Those 2 things are the biggest advantages we're going to see from this collaborative effort.
Another great manuscript by Dr. Montalbano was Ethical and Legal Considerations of Medical AI. And it hinted at a lot of what you talked about before relative to how we got to get this right. and there's not a lot of room for error. That manuscript gave an overview of a lot of the legal implications, and we don't have to dive into that today, and neither of us are attorneys. But I'm wondering on your thoughts relative to some of the bioethical principles and how moving forward we can really just steer the ship to get it right as we're developing these things.
Yeah, it was a great chapter by Dr. Montebello. He did fantastic. He's a great Harvard-trained ethicist and philosopher. Yeah, I think again it's going to be a collaborative approach to all of these issues. And the great thing about using AI in these ethical conundrums is the fact that you can pull up past similar episodes so easily and relate them to the current episode you're having at the time of your inquiry. So I think having all that past data and you can even ask what AI would project in the future under these circumstances. I think that's going to make a big impact in these ethical decisions, and they'll give you a perspective from various different philosophical outlooks. So I think that's going to be important. That's a little bit outside the realm of primary care, but certainly touches on what we do. Are you going to keep someone alive on life support? Are you going to, implement a DNR? Or are you going to send someone to a nursing home? Are you going to let them stay at home? Are you going to, bring in family members to make decisions for them before they're incapacitated? Those kind of things. So they'll definitely be, this kind of AI will definitely be helpful in these kind of decisions as well.
Switching gears a little bit, I've spent the majority of my career in medical education. I've been active in teaching medical students and residents and fellows, done a lot of work with curriculum development and continuing medical education. And even in the last year, I've seen such an amazing advancement of how our students really try to get at and synthesize information. One of my colleagues said not too long ago, I'm struggling now with trying to assess what a student knows versus what a student can look up quickly versus what a student can have AI generate for them. And I thought that was a really unique statement because it also changes this belief that we assess students based on what they know, not necessarily what they have access to find out in a short period of time, that ultimately is going to benefit a patient outcome. And Dr. Weber, Dr. Whitworth, and Dr. Stenner wrote a great manuscript on the future of AI in med ed and CME. I liked their approach to really trying to harness a collaborative practice, not only from the educators, but from the learners. I'm in my 50s and working with a student who's in their 20s. The student in their 20s is going to be so much more savvy on a computer than I'll be. I mean, there's no question about that. But watching them navigate things like ChatGPT and Perplexity and many other systems to be able to quickly generate differential based on even limited information, generate board style review questions, generate flashcards for studying, take patient information that they got from a chart and quickly develop a list of questions for them to go in and ask the patient to get at a differential diagnosis and a therapeutic plan. Their chapter and their manuscript really talked about a very unique way to also personalize learning on an individual basis based upon aptitudes or deficiencies of various learners. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on this too.
A fantastic question. It doesn't matter now, and I tell the residents this that I work with all the time. It doesn't matter what you know. You can find out something if you need to know it. What does matter is how you think and the quality of the questions that you can ask. And that takes some analysis. And so the thing that I always yell at them about in a fun way is their ability to ask questions. And I think as we move into the future and become more and more collaborative with the patients in the room and so forth, these kind of questions and asking the correct questions is going to come to really be the most important thing that we can do. Now you have to have a great knowledge base in order to ask the right questions. If you don't study and you don't know your stuff, you have no way of asking the right questions, which is why patients are going to always need to come to us. They don't really know the right questions to ask. For example, I just had a wife of a friend send me some pictures of her daughter with ringworm the other day, and said, "Can you send me a prescription for ringworm?" And I looked at the picture and I said, "Well, how do you know it's ringworm?" Well, I looked at a bunch of pictures and it's like ringworm, and she's had it before and it looks like ringworm. Well, she didn't know other questions to ask. Is it itching more at night? Are you sure it's not scabies? Is it anywhere else? Are you sure it's not some kind of psoriasis, any other papular squamous disease that it might be? So that's where we're going to come in handy. We're going to be more educated and have better questions to ask in collaboration with the patients. That's how I see it helping education most.
That's fantastic. I want to highlight what you just said, because that's been a really strong teaching element of mine throughout my whole career, and that's really something that was impressed upon me early. You've got to be able to ask the right questions to get the right information. And I think that needs to remain a very central core of not only medical education in our teaching, but in any patient interaction, to be able to get the information that's ultimately going to get us to where we need to go in diagnostic and therapeutic planning. So thank you for highlighting that. Relative to all this promise that AI has, improving workflow, summarizing knowledge, finding the 10th thing on the differential that maybe we didn't think of, and maybe that's the right answer. We're going to integrate AI across all of our practices and all of our patient populations, which look dramatically different across our specialties, our fields, our geographic areas, our zip codes, our collection of social determinants and factors within our practices. How do we make sure that these AI tools don't necessarily reinforce existing biases or somehow perpetuate or worsen healthcare disparities?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And that is a big problem with AI. Are we training it with biased data? Are we training it with data from white males or Black females or Hispanic authors? And so there's an inherent bias in a lot of these training datas. And it could be subtle stuff, like it just turns out to be that all of the majority of the studies on heart failure were done on people over 65 that were white. Why? Just because that's the 1,000 patients that they came across first. So you really have to be aware of bias. And how do we get around that type of bias? In all the data that I've read, all the studies I've read, they really want primary care docs to be primary care docs and to be computer programmers, not just kind of dilettante computer programmers, but real computer programmers, to be in there with the guys doing all of this stuff, doing all this AI programming. And they reckon that that's the best way to keep this kind of bias out of AI models that we're using in medicine. I'm not sure that's the only way, but the bias is certainly something that we have to be aware of. The second part of your question, I guess, Joel, was how do we keep AI from selectively addressing social determinants of health? AI will, like it or not, know more about your social determinants of health than you might want to tell us. When a patient comes into the office in the future, we'll know a little bit more about their social determinants of health, travel, healthcare access, poverty, social networks. We'll know more about that, and we'll be able to address some of those issues. So I think it could improve our care for those issues. And, the interesting thing about social determinants of health, of course, is that they account for 80% of the modifiable health outcomes, whereas what we do is only affects 20% of the modifiable health outcomes from diabetes and those kind of things. So it's super important that we address transportation and educational status and jobs and social networks, all really important aspects and social determinants of health. And I think a lot of that is going to be sucked up by AI and provided to us at the time of the patient visit, which will at least allow us to ask those questions and address those issues a little bit when patients come in. The other way that it can potentially help narrow the gap that you're talking about is that it will help physician bias, physician time as well. Like, so right now, we're not compensated for the Z codes or the social determinants of health. So naturally, doctors aren't going to do anything. They're not going to code them as social determinants of health. They're not going to spend much time doing them. Although they know they're important, they're just time limited. So I think those aspects of AI and enhancing billing in that for time is going to also help address and narrow this gap as well.
Well, I think there's a lot of really exciting opportunities. Certainly, we're early in the evolution of this. I look forward to seeing clinicians, and in particular primary care clinicians, play a role in the development of AI in healthcare and medical education, because I think we have a unique opportunity where we can help drive this and help create it to the benefit of the patient, but also to the benefit of us in terms of job satisfaction and efficiency and knowledge. And I think it can drive research. I think it can drive better clinical care. I think it can drive better clinical outcomes. I think it can improve cost-effective measures of healthcare. And as this evolves, what advice might you give to our listeners? I know many of our listeners are going to be intrigued by this. Many are probably going to feel that the development of AI is probably going to be over their heads or not something that they're going to do on a day-to-day hands-on basis. But what kind of advice might you give to one of our primary care clinicians on how they can play a role in the integration of AI in their daily practices?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think the main thing is to, which everybody's probably doing already in some fashion, is to continue to use AI. That would be first and foremost, to continue to use it. It's not going to go back in the bottle, so you're going to have to face a future that's using AI. Another thing is to, you just have to keep updated on the latest tools and so forth that are being used in AI, because they really can make your life and your practice a lot easier. I think those are the main general things I would say about integrating AI, is to keep using it and to keep your eyes open for ongoing updates. And there will be all kinds of updates coming up in the next probably 2 years, I'd say.
This is a topic that is going to be very ripe with a lot of energy and innovation. Our academy meetings, I could foresee, will always have some element of lectures and expert input, and then asking for our input as well in the development of this relative to what this means in all levels of education and clinical practice. I know there are guideline committees and organizations that are looking to AI to help make things more efficient, more cost effective, provide better outcomes. I'm hearing things where healthcare organizations are working with various AI entities to better track but improve quality of care and really get at the cost driving factors of this. But also, like you mentioned before, our patients, both on an individual and a collective type basis, I think will also help drive this forward because of their curiosities and because of their needs.
I think it leads to a more healthy future for us all, really. Yeah, the more educated patients are, the better it is going to be for health overall. And
you don't think that the computers will replace the docs anytime soon?
no, not anytime soon. There's always going to be that need for experience and wisdom and so forth, and prioritizing issues too. It'll always be there. Yeah.
Good. Well, I tend to think the same thing too. And I think that if we're smart about this, that we can be big players in how this is created and how it shapes out for the betterment of our patients, but also for a betterment of satisfaction in our own careers. So Vince, I want to give you a huge thanks. We've collaborated a lot over the years on a lot of great projects. I want to thank you for creating this volume, AI in Primary Care for Primary Care Clinics and Office Practice. Many kudos and congratulations to your author group for wonderful manuscripts that are very, very nascent and very, very important, I think, in this volume that will push this forward. Nothing exists like this right now, at least nothing that I'm aware of for primary care clinicians. And so you chose great topics and great authors to really push this forward. And so I'm indebted to you for that. I'll give you the final word on the topic, and we can close out.
Thank you very much for that. And most importantly, God, these authors did a fantastic job, all the way from, Nick Conley to Montebello to Radhika Dirks, who's an AI scientist herself and tours the world, talking about AI, and to Fortune 500 companies was really nice to do a book chapter for us, and all the authors were really fantastic. So I couldn't thank them enough either. But we're moving into an exciting future. So hold on, it's going to be a great ride.
Well, thanks a lot, Vince. We greatly appreciate your work.
Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today, and thank you again to our listeners for joining us for this edition of the Clinics Review Articles podcast series. We hope that this issue and podcast were helpful. For an exclusive discount on the issue we discussed today, focusing on AI in primary care, please visit us.elsevierhealth.com/expert. Primary Care Clinics and Office Practice is available for individual print subscription with accompanying online access, as well as individual online-only access, and is also available on Elsevier's electronic platforms Clinical Key and Science Direct. For more information on this series and our nearly 65 other titles spanning all medical disciplines, visit info.theclinics.com. Be sure to subscribe to the Clinics Review Articles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.